Alright guys, a little deck repair project today. Let's look at some code things first. Why this needs repair, why it failed, and then how we're gonna fix that as well. So code first. Code requires deck posts to be set on caissons, concrete footers that are elevated above grade first of all. So no buried posts. We don't want to bury our posts for deck support. And then that post needs to be anchored onto a metal base fastened to the concrete there. There's a couple of reasons for this. The obvious one is that a buried post is susceptible to rot. And there's ways to treat the post or encase it in like flashing, essentially, just to keep the moisture away from the post. There's ways around that. But the second problem is compression, and that's the real killer, and that's pretty hard to put a band-aid on, the compressive failure. So in this case, these posts have compressed into the ground. They're not rotted out, they're still solid, but they've compressed into the ground to the point that the deck, the staircase, is incredibly out of level. And I don't know if you can see that from this angle, but we're extremely out of level. So it's actually pulling away from the house and then down as well, down and to the left. Might be able to see it a little bit better from here. Yeah, so that's pretty rough. There's probably a 3 or 4 inch drop just on that top landing there. So back to code thing. I have lost a few bids lately for deck projects, and a lot of what I do charge is for the caisson setup, because it takes time. It's also kind of tedious to punch all these holes, go back to a different job for a week, and then come back once this is set up to finish the process. There's a lot of guys that just want to get their framing done in a day, slap some decking on, and get paid. But that's just not code. That's not how it works, and it's something that you do need to include in your bids when you're looking at these projects, is the back and forth time, where this is actually not a one-day job. I can't just swap the posts out, jack it up, level it, and call it a day, because it's going to fail the same way. Plus it doesn't need code. So there is a process to this, and you do have to do it correctly. The consequence of doing it incorrectly is obviously this, where, yeah, it's rough. It's kind of hard to see from this angle just with the shadows, but maybe from this side, oh yeah, we'll see a little bit better here. Yeah, that's not healthy. That's not kosher. So it's obviously pulling the railing away from the house as well. Separating the ledger, just not a good scenario. Usually, in my experience, the cheap bids for this kind of installation, the cheap bids are omitting the caisson process. That's usually one of the shortcuts that they take, just because it is tedious, and the hardware for it is actually pretty expensive as well. Concrete's cheap, but all the fasteners for that process add up pretty quickly. This project is interesting in the sense that it was, I assume, a builder installed there, because there's a door there. There's no way that this would have been done after the fact, so this would have had to been builder original. I don't know how they passed the original inspection like that, but we'll make it right, obviously. So process, we're gonna jack this up first. We're gonna get this braced and then cut the legs off and separate them completely, just so we're able to lift the deck up at that point, where it's not anchored into this This post is probably still holding on to something in the ground. It's just not, like it's not rotted away. That post isn't going to slide out of the ground. It's just compressed into it. So we do need to separate the post before we start jacking it up. So, all right, I'll post the second half of it when I get to that. All right, guys, bye. All right, part two. We've got this top platform mostly level. I might crank it up another tick just to get it perfect. Tightened up the rim joist as well as the railing to the house, so that looks a lot cleaner. As I was going, I did notice that the ledger had actually separated. Well, and I mean obviously it had separated from the top of the house. Part of the reason for that though is that they've got this ledger fastened with nails only. So as those posts were failing, this ledger is able to separate from the house laterally. So that's a big no-go. I did run one headlock in there just for now, just to keep it in position, and you can see that we got that smashed up against the brick where it belongs. Need to caulk in here a little bit, but that's some detail stuff. We'll go back through though and run more headlocks in here just to make sure that doesn't shift anymore. I was wrong about the original posts. Let's take a look at that. I had originally assumed that it was compressive failure because there was no visible rot on the post base, but it had compressed to this point, and the rot was actually 4 or 5 inches below grade. So it was actually both problems. It was rot on the post base as well as the compressive failure. Like you can see how much that had compressed as well as rotted out. So I put I'm just using a floor jack. You can use a farm jack or whatever. I put that on there just to get some tension on it. And as soon as I gave it a crank, both those posts just completely separated out of the ground. I'm just using an old post, and it's braced up against those existing posts just so it doesn't kick out. And then just jack it up. Less is more. You know, very, very delicate on that. As you're doing this, especially if you're doing it by yourself, make sure you're watching that ledger connection. Because if that ledger is already separated and we start jacking this up, it's not going to push that ledger back into place. It's just going to pull the deck up and out completely. And I hope you have good liability insurance in that case. Overall, there's a lot of other not very well built. The nails on the ledger was a ding, but they're not even running ledger locks or anything like that into the rim joist and post assembly. So you can see that's kind of started to separate as well. We're gonna get that cleaned up. Stairs, I'm really surprised they passed code originally. Stairs aren't perfectly level. It's still got a little bit of a downward slant. The pad itself is not level, but the solution there is to either shim up the base plate or to cut your stringers with to match that angle. That's the correct solution there. So overall, I'm actually surprised this passed the original inspection. Next step is just we're gonna use a plumb line, figure out where this base plate needs to land, get these replacement posts installed, and then rip these old posts out. I'm actually glad I didn't rip them out at first. It wouldn't hurt if you did, but I figured they were buried in some concrete or something, but popped right out, so it wouldn't hurt if I had removed them. But it kind of helps the process if you have something to anchor this bracing onto. So part 3 coming up. Alright, part 3 wrapped up. Did add a sway brace up in here, which is a diagonal brace. Not super necessary on smaller decks, just because there's really not a wind load or anything, but it does help with you know, use, like when people are walking up and down it. Just keeps everything stable and keeps it from shifting left to right. So that's it for this one. I hope it helped. Later, guys.